Many college students can relate to the struggle of juggling school, work, and even our social lives. When we think of the battles that we face with external factors, we tend to forget the internal factors that we might face and we all have in common. Although anxiety and depression affects our minds, it can go as far as causing other illnesses, but luckily those can be managed. Removing factors such as alcohol and caffeine alongside with adding healthy coping mechanisms in replacement of those things like yoga and meditation can be very beneficial to improving anxiety and depression within students. I will discuss the effects of caffeine and alcohol, then I will go more in depth on health issues that are directly related to those. Lastly, I will offer healthy coping mechanisms that can be used to combat anxiety and depression. I will now be discussing the contributing factors of caffeine. So, when we look at the caffeine consumption, we normally think of the pros: performance, and it enhances performance, it enhances cognitive function, fat utilization, it's an appetite suppressant, and it also has some health benefits, or so we may think. But the cons are actually it can impact sleep. Too much can be detrimental, increase stress levels, and it lowers your tolerance, meaning each time that you consume more and more caffeine, you would need more and more to provide the same effect that you would normally get for 1 cup of caffeine. So you would be eventually putting more in your body. How much caffeine is typically in a beverage? So caffeine has various things that it's in. If we think of soft drinks, it contains 40 to 70 milligrams of caffeine. When we think of energy drinks, it contains 160 to 240 milligrams of caffeine. And what we normally think as safe, our regular coffee, would be 300 to 330 milligrams of caffeine. So it is actually provides us with the most caffeine than those other drinks. So students are always associated with each other and caffeine. So when we think of studying, we think that caffeine helps us, but in reality, because caffeine messes with our REM sleep, it also makes it harder for students to retain information. So it isn't really allowing you to study. Not only does caffeine affect our sleep deprivation, it also causes dehydration. So we can't forget that caffeine is a stimulant. And because caffeine is a stimulant, it induces anxiety in the way that it causes mental disorganization. So we also have to look at alcohol. Alcohol is a depressant, so obviously it will cause depression. When we look at healthy coping mechanisms in replacement for those two things, we can look at exercising, eating healthy, establishing a study pattern, a healthy one, and a healthy sleep patterns. Anxiety and depression, according to the Journal of American College Health published in 2008, Dr. Troy B. Adam points out the 48,000 college students that were examined. These students were also experiencing bronchitis, ear infection, sinusitis, and strep throat. So the results showed that 0.56 and 0.91 in relation to those specific illnesses when looking at anxiety and depression. So depression also affects 12.6 million women and 6.3 million men annually. When we narrow this down to look at our intended group of interests, 12.6% of females and 6.2% of male students have reported being diagnosed with either anxiety or depression. So it affects a lot more of us than we think. Lastly, I will go more in depth on healthy coping mechanisms that can be used to combat anxiety and depression. So when we look at exercising, it is very detrimental to our health, but it also helps with anxiety and depression. When we look at meditation and yoga, these are both healthy outlets, and they help us practice mindfulness. So it's something that is very easily accessible. It can be found on various platforms such as YouTube, where it can be free. And even just thinking to ourselves, and holding ourselves accountable, and just as little as doing it once per week can be very beneficial to our health. So students should not feel ashamed or feel alone, because at one point we all face that battle of anxiety and depression. Healthy coping mechanisms are not limited to the ones that were discussed, and awareness and prevention are the most helpful ways on combating anxiety and depression. When we look at the effects of caffeine and alcohol in relation to anxiety and depression, I also stated effects it can take on the students' bodies and also minds, and showed how it isn't inevitable and it can be regulated with modification of lifestyles. So anxiety and depression is something that we can cope with and possibly prevent if we spread awareness. We also have to think twice about what we choose to put in our bodies and how we choose to treat them. Simple steps can be taken, such as the ones listed, and taking the time to treat your body and mind the way it deserves can go such a long way. Thank you.